In this video, you're going to learn the complete process to get someone to join your worship team. We're going to talk through step by step what they need to do to join your worship team. We're talking about auditions, we're talking about interviews, we're talking about applications. I know it seems like a lot, but I'm going to break it down step by step and why you need each part coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. In this video, we're talking about getting people to join your worship team. What's the process that they need to go through? Do you just ask them and then they play with you the next Sunday morning? I don't think that that's the best way. So we're going to talk through the process, what you need to have in place. I'm going to be sharing with you even the exact things that I use as far as an application goes and what an audition and an interview looks like. We're going to be talking about that, and I'm going to share with you my resources down below in the description, so you can check that out down below right now. But this is part of a larger series of videos called How to Build Your Worship Team. So there's also a link in the description below to a playlist with the other videos in this series, where we talked about starting with your current worship team in the first video, and then in the last video we talked about how to find worship team members, and that's going to be important to know as we step into this, because you actually have to have worship team members or potential worship team members to put through the process that we're going to talk about in this video. So if you didn't see that video yet, you can check that video out down in the description below. But let's get into it. Let's talk about the step-by-step process for once somebody says they are interested in joining your worship team, what do you do? Before we get into that though, I want to hear, what is your process for joining your worship team? What do you have people do whenever they say, hey, I want to join the worship team? What do you say? Do you say, okay, well, you need to do this, 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 and this? Or are you like, okay, that's great. Come on Sunday morning and play with us. There's no right or wrong answer. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks for sharing your process down in the comments below. Let me share with you my process that I use to get people to join my worship team. The first step in the process of people joining your worship team is not something that people have to do, it's something that you have to do, and that is to ask people to join your worship team. And this is kind of piggybacking off of the video last week in this series about recruiting worship team members. Sure, you can throw an announcement slide up, but that's not going to draw in 100 different people to your worship ministry. The best way to find people for your worship ministry is to build relationships with people in your church, identify their gifts, and then ask them to join the worship team. So the first step in the process is actually you going out and asking people in your church if they want to join the worship team, if you identify that giftedness in them. And that leads us into the process, because once you ask them to join the worship team, you have to have a process to lead them through. What if you just ask somebody, do you want to join the worship team? And they're like, yeah, I'd love to. And you're like, cool. You want to show up on Sunday and lead worship with us, right? No, there's a better way. So let me share with you that way now. Let's move on to the second part of the process. All right, the second step in the process is the application, right? I want people to fill out a form, because this does a few things. First of all, if people aren't going to take their role on your worship team seriously, then you probably don't want them on the team, because they're just going to cause more problems in the future than it's worth. All right, just being honest. So the application serves as sort of a minor hurdle for people to join your worship team. I know you're like, man, I just want to add a bunch of people to my worship team, but it's okay to have them go through some hurdles, and you're going to see that this isn't just an arbitrary hurdle for them to jump through, but we want them to take what they do seriously. And if they aren't willing to read and fill out an application to join the worship team, then they're probably not going to take their role seriously on the worship team. So this application shows that you take the position of worship team member, ultimately worship leader, as important. You're not just like, hey, anybody can join who wants to join because we're just looking for warm bodies to fill a spot on our team. No, we want worship leaders. So have an application in place. And this application does that. It also allows you to set expectations. All right, you get to say, this is what we believe as a worship ministry, and this is what you're going to be held accountable to. So this is where you talk about things like showing up to rehearsal on time, being prepared for a rehearsal, about representing the church well. You want to list all of this stuff out, and I'll link to my worship ministry overview, I think I call it, down in the description below. You can grab that and see the things that I talk about. If you just want to use the one that I give you, that's fine too. Don't feel bad about that. But feel free to change it so it meets your needs as well. But in that document, I lay out everything that I believe and expect from my worship team so that they aren't surprised. We're not trying to scare people away, but we're trying to just lay it out in front of them so that they know what they're getting into. You know, oftentimes I don't think people realize that this isn't just a Sunday morning commitment. You know, we're going to have rehearsals throughout the week, and then we're going to show up early on Sunday, and then we're going to lead on Sunday, but also throughout the week we're working on our own individual parts. Like, there's a lot of work, as you know, of being on a worship team. So we want to make that really clear to people up front so they don't get stuck in a role that they can't live up to and they can't meet the expectations. So lay the expectations out in front of them. I do this application through Google Docs. I think it's easy to just email somebody a link. You know, have a nice little email that you've got typed up that just says, hi, whoever, thanks for your interest in serving on the worship team. The next step in the process is to fill out this application, and you'll hear back from us after that, you know, something like that. So that's what you need in place. That is the really kind of the first step after you ask them to join the worship team, is to have an application in place. Once again, I've linked what I use down in the description below. Let's move on to this third step in the process, or the second thing that you need for people to join your worship team, the second step in the process. All right, after you've asked them to join the worship team, they've filled out an application, then I like to have people audition. And this sounds intimidating, but it doesn't have to be that intimidating. What that looks like is you set aside a time to have them come and just play music. And while we talked about in the application side of things, like the spiritual side of things, also in that application you're going to see, like, I asked them their testimony, how long they've been coming to the church, stuff like that, so that I can get to know the spiritual side of their walk with Jesus. In the audition, we're talking about the musical side of things. So yes, music is important. We also want to know the spiritual side of things as well, but they have to be able to do like a certain amount musically. We aren't just adding people on the team just because they say they want to be on the team. So auditions are your time to figure that out. And what that looks like is giving them a song or a couple songs to play with you. Like, I would say like 2 or 3 songs. If you're going to meet with them, give them 2 or 3 songs that you do with your worship team, not just random songs, but like, these are the songs that we play on Sunday. I want you to learn the acoustic guitar part for this, or the piano part for this, or the harmony for this, or whatever role they're auditioning for. Give them that song or a couple songs and have them learn it, and then meet with them one-on-one, or you can have them send in a video, however you want to do it, and have them go through the song and see how it works out, see where they're at musically, and be listening for, okay, can this person work in our worship team? And then I guess we'll talk about how to say no in a second, but after that, yeah, you'll know them musically, you'll know what they're capable of, and that's really important, because it's what we always say, it's not just the musical side, it's the spiritual side as well. But it's not just the spiritual side, it's the musical side as well. If they're not gifted musically, then the worship team probably isn't the spot for them to serve. So that's the next thing you need, the audition. Give them a couple songs to work on and sit down with them, work through those songs with them, and then move on to the next step in the process. On to the next step in the process. After you've asked them, given them an application to fill out, done an audition, then comes the interview. And this isn't like an intimidating thing. This is just like, now it's finally your time to talk to the person one-on-one and get to know them a little bit better. So I like to do that like at the same time as the audition. So they'll like come in and run through a couple songs, and then after that we'll sit down and just talk about the application that they filled out. So that is what the interview is. So you just look at the application, you see the things that they wrote down and the questions that you asked, and then you ask them a couple more questions about it if you need anything clarified, or you just ask them like about their previous experience in any worship team and stuff. Like, an interview doesn't have to be intimidating. We're just trying to get to know the person a little bit better and have like a short, 10-15 minute conversation with them, just something simple, so that you can get to know them more than just their name on an application and their musical style, right? We want to actually get to know them. And so don't be afraid to ask questions here about their faith. Don't be afraid to ask them about like their musical level. Don't be afraid to get into the specifics of what it means to be on the worship team. I also like to go over again those things that we talked about that I showed them in the application, and just say like, these are the expectations that you're held to. I'll walk them through that document now in person, just to reinforce the expectations so that they know what they're getting into. They can see it again. We reinforce those ideas, and then I give them a chance to ask me any questions that they want about being on the worship team. And then I'll say, okay, thanks for your time, thanks for your interest in joining the team. I'll let you know on a final decision here in the coming week, or something like that. And then that takes us to the final step. All right, that leads us to the final step in this process, and that is to make a decision. Is this person going to be on the worship team? If they are, say, thanks. I send them an email, or maybe I'll catch them after church on a Sunday and say, thanks so much for your interest. I want you to be a part of the worship team. Thanks for joining. This is what the next steps in the process looks like, which we're going to talk about in next week's video. But we're going to have a process not just to find worship team volunteers, not just to get them to join the team, but also once they join the team, we need to figure out how to assimilate them into the team and get them serving just like the rest of the team. It's not like you just step into a worship team and you're ready to go. There's a lot of nuances and things that you have to figure out along the way, and we need a process to lead people through figuring that out. So we'll talk about that next week. Usually it involves like, hey, okay, come to worship rehearsal next week. That's a good starting point, but we'll talk about that more in next week's video. Now, if the answer is no, that's a tough conversation, right? Here's what I found though. Well, I'll tell you how to say no in a second, but if they've made it this far in the process, chances are they probably take their role seriously. They're not just trying to join the worship team just to be like a musician in the church. Like, they're going to take it seriously because they've gone through these hurdles that you've put in front of them to sort of vet out the people who are actually going to serve well on your worship team. When I started serving at a new church a couple months ago, and I had a list of 13 people, I think it was, who were potentially interested in joining the worship team, and I laid this process out in front of them, and by the time we were done, I only had 2 people who were interested in joining the worship team. And I didn't see that as a failure. I saw that as the process at work. Those 11 other people, they couldn't commit to the expectations that I had for the worship team. And I'm not mad at them for that. I think that's fine, but that's why I laid out the expectations in advance, so that they can see, serving on the worship team isn't just showing up on a Sunday morning and singing a few songs. And then they said, okay, well, this is more than I expected. I can't commit to that, so I'm not going to pursue it any further. So what I'm trying to say is that if you you put people through this process, they are going to disqualify themselves, or they're not going to be interested in what being on a worship team actually means. So you aren't going to have to say no that often. But when you do have to say no, this is what I think you should keep in mind. I think you should keep in mind that we don't just want it to be a flat out no. We want to give people things to work on. So if it's because of the musical side of things, say, like, be honest with them. Tell them, some of your harmonies were flat. Your timing was off on your guitar strumming. You couldn't play the riffs that you needed to play for lead guitar. Like, be honest with them and tell them, if you can work on improving those things, then I'd love for you to come back and audition again for the worship team. I think that that's a perfectly acceptable conversation to have. You don't just want these people joining your worship team and then you've got like more problems to deal with. Deal with it right now. Give them another opportunity to audition. Tell them, I want you to work on this for the next month and then get back in touch with me in a month and we'll set up another time for you to audition. And then they've got another chance. And if they still don't have it fixed then maybe it's time for them to find a different ministry to serve in for this season right now. And you can help them find that. But yeah, it's okay to say no. Like, you can either sort of offend one person, or you can offend like your entire church because you put somebody on your team who really shouldn't be up there because they're not skilled musically. Like, we want people to serve in their area of giftedness, and if they're not gifted in music, then we're just lying to them. So it's okay to say no. Don't be afraid to say no. But if you work them through this process, you're not going to have to say no very often. So there it is, the complete process for getting someone to join your worship team. Number 1, we ask them to join. Number 2, we have them fill out an application, send them a link to that Google Doc, tell them that's the next step. They have to fill that out, then you'll be in contact with them. After that, they do an audition. You schedule an audition with them. You give them a couple songs that they need to work on. You get with them one-on-one, see where they're at musically during that time. Number 4, you do an interview where you get to know them a little bit better. You ask them questions about what they filled out on their application. You go over worship team expectations again. Ask them if they have any questions about anything. Say thank you for your interest. And then number 5, make a decision. And talk to them after church on a Sunday, or send them an email. Give them a yes or a no, not yet. Work on these few things, and we'll talk about it again in the future. So that is the process. And then after that, you need a system to assimilate them into your worship team. And we're going to talk about that in next week's video. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on that video. Also, there's a link in the description below to a free worship team rehearsal blueprint that I put together. I think that this is one of the best times to lead your worship team, is during worship rehearsals, either throughout the week, or maybe you can't do that and you meet like early on Sunday mornings. That worship team rehearsal time is so important to lead your team spiritually and relationally and musically. And so we've got to have a system in place to do that and do that well. And that's what the worship team rehearsal blueprint's all about. So check that out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.